Muy bien, continuamos entonces. La siguiente presentación es del doctor Marcelo Paes de Barros, que conocimos el año pasado en Montevideo. Sí, Marcelo tiene una bachillerato en química de la Universidad de São Paulo y un doctorado en química de la misma universidad. Es una pasantía de investigación en la Universidad de Fukuoka, en Japón, y un doctorado o doctorados en botánica en la Universidad de Estocolmo y en la Universidad de Boston en Suecia. Actualmente es profesor titular nivel 2 de la Universidad de Cruzeiro del Sur en São Paulo y investigador colaborador de la Universidad de São Paulo también, departamento de bioquímica, departamento de fisiología y biofísica. Es un gusto tener a Marcelo acá.
Como todos sabem aqui, eu sou brasileiro e gostaria muito de fazer minha apresentação em português. Mas eu sou o único a falar português aqui, então não posso. Então, vou apertar a tecla SAP. Então, exacto, me gustaría mucho también hablar, hacer mi charla en español, pero también no hablo español, es un portuñol horrible. Entonces, la tecla SAP nuevamente. I would like to present my talk today in English, if you don't mind. Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Victor and Patricia for their kind invitation for me to present here part of our previous and recent findings. Briefly, I would like to present the planning of this presentation, so I would like to give you a brief introduction to reactive oxygen and nitrogen species, then discuss a little bit about antioxidant activity, the hormesis principle, which is very important regarding nutraceutical compounds. Then I'll get through carotenoids, focusing on astaxanthin, which is the theme of this presentation. I'll give you some background results from our group and then our recent findings. I know that most of the discussion here is focused on carotenoids from fruits. I think I could give you some ideas about biological activities, how to test them, or how to approach these biological activities for your carotenoids isolated from tropical fruits. So briefly, not all reactive oxygen and nitrogen species are free radicals. By definition, a free radical per se is any independently existent atom or molecule. Therefore, you need to identify it or perhaps quantify it in a biological system, for example, with one or more impaired electron. Not all, and moreover, not all radicals are very reactive. For example, this one. This radical is quite stable. You could even isolate it in organic solvent, for example. Regarding intracellular sources of these species, we have to look deeply on electron transport chains. For example, in chloroplasts and in mitochondria. If you take a look at the molecular production of these reactive oxygen and nitrogen species, 90% approximately is produced in mitochondria. And then the other 10% must be produced from cytoplasm enzymes or even in the membrane of these cells. So these species, these reactive oxygen species, are produced by a partial reduction of oxygen until or up to water. If you have the 4 electron reduction directly, as it should happen, or in mitochondrial environment, you will have the full reduction of oxygen through water. But whenever you have some special conditions inside mitochondria or in cells, you can produce this intermediate redox species, such as superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, and this very harmful radical called hydroxyl radical. Okay? Then there are many reactions involved in these species, but I would like to keep these two in mind. This is the Fenton reaction which produces the hydroxyl radical from the decomposition of hydrogen peroxide catalyzed by iron 2, sorry. Why this reaction is so important? Because, in fact, hydrogen peroxide is not locked in the site where it is produced. Since hydrogen peroxide is a small, uncharged molecule, it can diffuse throughout membranes. So you can find this molecule in vicinal cells or even in distant locus from the site it was produced. So in order to understand how this radical could oxidize biomolecules inside cells, you can actually have to look where ions are available. Okay? And furthermore, iron 3 ions, which is innocuous to catalyze this reaction, can be reconverted, reduced back to the harmful iron 2 forms by superoxide radical, which is constantly produced by active mitochondria. So once again, it's important to look at the sources or where iron 3 or iron 2 is linked or bond. So you have two proper proteins to take care of these iron ions, which are transferrin and ferritin, then providing very low redox potential for this metal. But whenever these metals are not linked or bound to these two carrying proteins, it can be available in biological systems and then could catalyze those reactions I showed before. Keep in mind that heme proteins regarding this iron here is also important in terms of generation of free radicals through two highly oxidized forms of heme proteins, form iron 5 and iron 4. So through an oxidation based on hydrogen peroxide, you can achieve a highly excited form, and then the decomposition will bring free radicals during the process. And then I would like to also introduce some nitrogen reactive species, which peroxynitrite is a protagonist of many processes. So this reaction is notably the most fast reaction in biological systems. The direct reaction between superoxide radicals and nitric oxide, forming peroxynitrite. This is a very harmful compound for biological systems, especially for heme proteins or metal-centered proteins. CO2, these are kind of secondary reactions promoting other radicals, and also for thiol groups, important in redox regulation for most eukaryotic cells. So, and then it's tempting to present you kind of a speedometer for the reactivity of these radicals. So you have very slow radicals, but whenever these slow reactive species react with each other, it can form more harmful or more reactive radicals, as I showed you, the hydroxyl radical and peroxynitrite. Okay, so here just a complete pen or summarize of these reactions. So you have reactive oxygen species starting from the superoxide radical, forming hydrogen peroxide, the whole of iron in catalyzing this decomposition, forming hydroxyl radical. And then you have the other side with many nitrogen-centered radicals. What is important here is that some of these compounds, despite their harmful effects, they have signaling functions. So it's expected to have some kind of moderate levels, or let's say steady state levels of these free radicals in every cells. So you get this in mind. So free radicals must be slowed down, right? So not that simple. This is a dialogue from a movie, from 007 movie from 1983. So it's right in the beginning of the film. So James Bond was in a spa, theoretically recovering for his last mission, and then he was talking with his boss by the phone. Then his boss told him that too many free radicals, that's your problem, 007. And he said, well, free radicals, sir? Yes, they are toxins that destroy the body and the brain, caused by eating too much red meat and white bread. And too many dry martinis. And then he suddenly concluded, okay, so I should cut off the white bread, sir. Of course, because the other items are not possible for his diet. So then you could think, okay, so we are exposed to these free radicals, very harmful, they could oxidize our molecules. Don't we have defenses against them? Yes, we have, as mostly of you know, the antioxidant compounds. So this is a very important topic because sometimes we can make a confusion about the activity of these antioxidants. So antioxidants is any compound that could prevent the formation or scavenge them already formed or even repair the oxidized modifications they cause. So in fact, we have 3 different levels of antioxidation activity. And as most of you know, we have a huge branch of enzymes and also carrying proteins such as those 2 I told you, transferrin and ferritin with bonds, iron ions. Then they act as a prevention or preventive proteins. They avoid the formation of these free radicals by retaining iron in their structure. Many enzymes involved in repair systems, and as most of you know as well, dietary low molecular weight compounds, which are the main focus of this session or this workshop. So this is very important. Sometimes we forget about this, that despite they have all these antioxidants, they have their own antioxidant activity by themselves. They work better, or they work in synergism when they are coupled or as a sum of their effects. And the best example I have to show you is combining vitamin E tocopherols with vitamin C ascorbate. So as you know, vitamin E tocopherols are lipid-soluble compounds, antioxidants, so they are involved in membranes. And there they could scavenge these harmful radicals, and then they become a free radical. That's the chemistry involved. They offer the remaining electron for these compounds for them to get their electronic stability, but they become a free radical per se, more stable, of course, but even though they have to be eliminated from the system, in this case the membrane. So how is it possible? Well, tocopherol radical tends to go to the surface, the lipid-water interface, and there they interact with ascorbic acid. Then ascorbic acid transfer the electron they need to become, once again, tocopherol, and then can perpetuate their antioxidant activity. And then you must be thinking, so it seems that it's just a matter of transferring the electron from one point to the other. Exactly. But when you have a scorbyl radical in ecosystem, you have a bunch of antioxidant system that could get rid of this radical and form, as we say, non-radical products. So this interaction is very important. So most of the time when we observe antioxidant activity from any compound, you can bet that if you couple them with some kind of, for example, water-soluble antioxidants such as vitamin C, you could get much better results even with lower concentrations. Okay. Moving forward, carotenoids are important, as you know. Regarding their scavenging activity, mostly because of the highly conjugated system, so they can distribute this radical throughout the whole structure of this carotenoid, which is a very stable radical, as most of you know. And even as a quencher of excessive energy from singlet oxygen. But another important point here is to discuss this KEEP NRF2 system. This is very important nowadays. Researchers working with nutraceuticals, they have discovered that this system is reactive to some chemical moieties in nutraceuticals. Then this KEEP protein could react with these chemical groups in many nutraceuticals, be linked to them, form, sometimes you have a dimer formed, and leave the protein, the transcription factor, NRF2, free to induce some important genes, such as those responsible for antioxidant activities or cytoprotective functions. So many of the compounds present in food or some micronutrients, they act like this, much more than their proper antioxidant activity when we test them in vitro. So this is worthwhile testing whenever you get your new carotenoid compounds, for example. Okay, this is, in my point of view, this is one of the best schemes that show how oxidative stress works. So if you have, this is actually, this figure is prepared for exercise. As exercise as a oxidative event related to adaptation. But you can think in any other pathologic process, for example. So you have oxidative stress or oxidative insult going on, which will change the redox balance in your cell. So what you expect is that this oxidative insult will bring you into let's say the pharmacological range to induce redox related responses from your cell. Why? Because whenever you get this mild oxidation, you will get adaptation. You will get an antioxidant response from your cells. For example, regarding exercise, that's the benefits from exercising regularly. When you have mild oxidation induced in your cells. However, if this oxidative stimulus is too large, then you clearly will go further this limit. You go into the oxidized state, you get into the oxidative stress range, and then you're gonna accumulate oxidative damage to your DNA, lipid peroxidation, protein oxidation. Your cells will have to adapt to this unfavored condition, and sometimes you'll not be able to recover from it. And you'll get into an accumulative process or a chronic disease. This figure, I think it's brilliant because, as you can see here, antioxidant system is not a fixed point. If you improve the antioxidant capacity, this support point will come to your right. And then you have to think about physics here. So with the same oxidative insult, if you have higher antioxidant capacity, you will not reach properly the desired or the expected range for getting adaptation. I'm not sure if I've been clear here. What I mean, for example, regarding exercise, if you get too much antioxidants, you'll not get the benefits or the physiological benefits from them, because your antioxidant activity is so high that you'll not have the recommended steady state concentrations of those redox signaling molecules. Okay, so this is a new concept called, not new, this is a very important concept called Hormesis principle, that most of the cells need some kind or some level of oxidative insult in order to adapt. Not more, not less, not more. The very right concentration there. How to get that? It's very difficult, very difficult. Okay, and there are some amazing research going on talking about nanoswitches, where they say that depending on the redox potential of your cell, the cellular fate could be defined. If it's proliferation, differentiation, if it goes through apoptosis, depending on the cellular machinery, of course, or directly to necrosis. This is the hot stuff right now in free radical metabolism. How the redox condition of the redox state in cells could change the cellular fates. Well, altogether, I would like to talk about my compound, not my compound, but the compound I work with which is astaxanthin. It's a pinkish orange carotenoid found in salmons, in many seafood, but which is produced by microalgae and zooplankton, not by fish. Fish accumulates from these lower trophic levels. As you can see, here is a xanthophyll provided with 2 keto groups and 2 hydroxy groups at both edges of the molecule. And what we've been working with is with the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, cognitive, and also related to exercise applications of astaxanthin. Starting with the antioxidant properties, it's very interesting because, as I told you, these 2 molecules are small molecules, uncharged, and these molecules could directly cross membranes without any problem to reach intracellular compartments and act as signals or act as pro-oxidant events depending on their concentration. However, when you have membranes associated with astaxanthin, because of the polar groups at both edges, this carotenoid tends to assume kind of a vertical distribution in these membranes, which abruptly changes the physical-chemical properties of this membrane. This membrane becomes more rigid. The hydrophobic core gets more apolar character, more apolar or hydrophobic aspects, and it seems that it becomes a barrier for the freely diffusion of these 2 molecules. So this could be approached or understood as a possible antioxidant capacity as well. So please pay attention to this. Rather than intercepting these 2 reactive oxygen and nitrogen species, astaxanthin could act as an antioxidant by restraining the permeation inside cells. So we tested this long time ago, but I think it's necessary to show to you, with liposomes, which are membrane biomimetic systems. So we incorporated, we loaded membranes with astaxanthin, and we produced the free radicals outside by reacting hydroperoxides with iron. So the hydroxyl radical was produced outside, and we could observe that astaxanthin was a very good scavenger of these free radicals produced outside. And then we checked the opposite. We loaded the liposomes with iron inside, in the inner aqueous compartment, and then we loaded the membrane with astaxanthin. So in order to produce the same radicals, hydrogen peroxide, for example, should cross the membrane, reach free iron ions inside, and then form these free radicals. And then we could observe that astaxanthin could block partially the formation or the lipid peroxidation induced by these free radicals. Moving forward, we checked anti-apoptotic properties of astaxanthin. What is important here is to remember that one of the main triggering events in apoptosis is the modification of cytochrome C. So cytochrome C, rather than a simply electron transfer from complex 3 to complex 4, in the presence of excessive of high amounts of peroxynitrite and hydrogen peroxide, it gains peroxidase activity, and apparently all the oxidizing process involved in apoptosis starts on. So one of the main events is the change or the achievement of peroxidase activity from cytochrome C. So we checked that working with a compound called SIN1. This compound generates both superoxide and nitric oxide. Then we assumed that these two radicals could react in aqueous systems and then form peroxynitrite. And then we could observe that the peroxidase activity was achieved by cytochrome C in these two liposome forms. One is with lipids with no charges, and this is with liposomes formed with lipids negatively charged. Why negatively charged? Because it will bring cytochrome C, a positive protein reaching histidines closer to the membrane. Okay. So we checked that, we published that in 2009, the chemistry involving this system, how liposomes, how this system provided with the liposomes, the lipids, and SIN1 could act as a mimic of apoptosis. This was published. And then we checked astaxanthin properties against it. This first graph is just to show that the modification in cytochrome C is permanent. So after 10 minutes and 20 minutes, the compound was definitely changed by peroxynitrite. This is not a reversible process. So right there, this is a biomarker of lipid oxidation, T-bars. And we observed that in the presence of these two, SIN1, the peroxynitrite generator, and cytochrome C, we could observe higher lipid peroxidation. Here with the liposomes with no charge, and here with liposomes loaded with negatively charged lipids, which again will bring cytochrome C closer to the membrane, improving this protein oxidizing capacity. It's interesting how astaxanthin could act as a scavenging antioxidant in both systems. Now let's go forward. What we observe as well is that pH also affects astaxanthin properties. So when we had the simple the liposomes in pH 6.2, we could observe 20% inhibition of lipid peroxidation, 30% at 6.8, at physiological pH of 7.4, the highest antioxidant capacity of astaxanthin, about 80%, and decreased when pH becomes more basic. Okay, so next checkpoint is astaxanthin anti-inflammatory properties. So most of these assays were performed in vitro. So we isolated lymphocytes from humans and treated in vitro with astaxanthin. And it's very interesting because at around 10 micromolar, this compound became very toxic to these cells. We couldn't understand properly why. but it was a fact. It was repeated several times. Anyway, and curiously, when we were working with neutrophils, another immune cell, the first cells that arrive at the inflammatory site, we could observe that we checked it like this. We isolated neutrophils, activated them with PMA, which is a chemical compound, and then neutrophils start what is called the oxidative burst. They produce a lot of free radicals. Okay, so we add cytochrome C, which is very sensitive to these radicals, and observe cytochrome C reduction. So with zero concentration of astaxanthin, we observed such a degree of cytochrome C reduction. As much astaxanthin we added to the system because of its scavenging capacity, scavenging superoxide radicals, for example, we could observe that cytochrome C was less reduced. But that was up to 10, around 10 micromolar again. So this is interesting. There's something around this concentration. When we worked with 20 micromolar or 40, the reduction was almost as in the absence of astaxanthin, which means that astaxanthin was doing nothing there, apparently. So this, once again, we thought about this range, this, let's say, pharmacological range. We believe that this effect of astaxanthin, of these polar carotenoids in membranes, could be interfering in cellular communication or the properties of these cells' membranes. Then, also, again, working with lymphocytes, we isolate now, this time we isolated lymphocytes from diabetic rats, treated or not with astaxanthin, but a very high dose, 20 milligrams per kilogram body weight. And we could observe that positively, diabetic rats showed higher degrees of lipid peroxidation in plasma, but when supplemented for 45 days with astaxanthin, this level was brought to the control levels. And the same regarding calcium efflux, directly related to apoptosis processes. Astaxanthin could diminish the level of calcium efflux. So you must think that this was a positive effect of astaxanthin supplementation. But, but when we checked the capacity of proliferation of these cells, the proliferation capacity of lymphocytes were completely abolished. Why? Because the concentration was so high that those important redox signals were abolished in this system, and cells, these important cells, could not proliferate. So if you think the whole immune process, this was jeopardized, definitely jeopardized. So it's not just a matter of being an efficient antioxidant, okay? We published that in 2010 with the diabetic rats. And then we thought about doses. So apparently 20 milligrams per kilo is too much. So let's work with less. Let's try 1 milligram astaxanthin. So once again, we worked with rats. Now we checked the cellular properties of neutrophils, but then we decided to combine astaxanthin with a powerful antioxidant, which is omega-3 fatty acids provided by fish oil. Okay, so here we were thinking about micronutrients present in salmon, for example. So we focus on the combination of astaxanthin and omega-3 fatty acids. So here we were observing the phagocytic activity of these neutrophils, and as you can see here, apparently omega-3 fatty acids were more important in increasing phagocytic activity of neutrophils than the combination of both. So this was important. But we also observed that these cells showed higher levels of glutathione, which is another important antioxidant for controlling redox balance in these cells. So that was the first evidence we had that combining antioxidant, the powerful astaxanthin antioxidant capacity with other antioxidants could get better results. So next step, we isolated neutrophils from humans and incubated them with this fluorescent probe. It's very interesting because it has a fatty acid anchor which keeps this probe inside membranes, and this group here, this chromophore group here, is very sensitive to the radicals that propagate lipid peroxidation. So in order to follow the propagation of lipid peroxidation, what we observed is the decay of fluorescence at 600 nanometers. So we activated the neutrophils. Neutrophils start to produce free radicals, and they promote auto-oxidation. So whenever these cells are activated, NADPH oxidase starts to produce a lot of free radicals that oxidize then their lipids by auto-oxidation process. Well, in the absence of astaxanthin, you could see that both systems were equal in the lipid peroxidation rate, or let's say the fluorescence decay, the signal fluorescence decay. And when we added astaxanthin 5 micromolar, as you can see here, we could observe lower rate of auto-oxidation, and 10 micromolar, the almost abolished, or the progress of lipid peroxidation was very slow. Then we went through the cognitive aspects of astaxanthin. So we supplemented rats for, again, 45 days with 1 milligram of astaxanthin. And the first test we performed was this, which is called the elevated plus maze, which serves to evaluate anxiety behavior. So the rat that is very anxious, he spends more time in the closed arms of this maze, and less anxious rats explore more the open arms of this maze. So we checked 2 different indexes. Total time in open arms, we could not observe any significant difference, but when checking exploratory time in open arms, we could observe that both fish oil supplemented, which means omega-3 supplemented, and Asta plus omega-3 supplemented rats, they displayed less anxiety behavior. And then, once again, you may think, okay, so once again, astaxanthin is not the responsible for this beneficial effects. But then we decided to go to the anterior forebrain section of their brains. Why? Because this section is directly related to the anxiety behavior, and this region is rich in dopaminergic connections, and dopamine is promptly sensitive to auto-oxidation. And there we could observe that the supplementation of fish oil brought many adverse results. And one of the most critical was this one, T-bars, the biomarker of lipid peroxidation. As you can see here, when rats were supplemented with fish oil, we could observe higher levels of lipid peroxidation, despite the anxiolytic behavior they showed. But when you see the rats supplemented with both astaxanthin and omega-3 fatty acids, the level of lipid peroxidation was much lower than control groups. So we believe that by combining astaxanthin with fish oil with omega-3 fatty acids, We can obtain anxiolytic effects and also protection to the oxidation process in their brains. We published that in 2011, but since we only have few anxiety tests, psychological tests, we left the message like this: putative anxiolytic effects, perhaps. And then that idea of combining omega-3 fatty acids and astaxanthin took us to this compound, this krill oil. Krill is this microcrustacean from polar regions of the globe. And why this compound? Because it's a natural combination of astaxanthin and omega-3 fatty acids. So this is a review. We present some perspective of the combination of both as neuroprotective effects. And then we go through experimental groups. So we had a control group, fish oil, omega-3, asta, the combination of both, and krill oil. So you must observe that krill oil, despite it's a natural combination of astaxanthin and fatty acids, this oil has very low astaxanthin concentration. So after measuring this concentration, we were not expecting to observe substantial effects in terms of cognitive benefits. As you can see here, we checked some antioxidant enzymes, and always krill oil showed the same level as control, completely different when we had astaxanthin supplementation. Single supplementation or in combination with omega-3. Then we decided to check once again some important brain regions. We went through cerebellum and the motor cortex of these animals in order to check possible involvement of astaxanthin in motor control. As you can see here, this is a GPRA protein which marks astrocytes, which are cells involved in, let's say, brain stress. Whenever you have brain stress, you can observe that these cells produces or are induced, are activated in order to provide protection for neurons and other important cells. As you can see here, krill oil induces these cells, so it's possibly acting as a pro-oxidative agent. We checked other parameters as well with no significant differences, and this was published last year in Marine Drugs. And finally, we worked with exercise, which is nowadays the front line of our laboratory there in Brazil. So the first idea that astaxanthin could act as a potential antioxidant for exercise came from the nature. If you think how salmon reproduce, these animals, these fishes, they have to swim uphill, which means a huge physical effort, and then put their eggs for fecundation at the top of the river. So from the 70s, this is they could observe that some salmon fishes were apparently having problems with their reproduction indexes, and mostly they observed that their eggs were less pigmented than let's say regular salmon, and with many consequences for the small fishes that had just ecloded. And then they observed that most of this problem came from the concentration of astaxanthin in their tissues, something like 50%. So the lack of astaxanthin in the muscles and other tissues were providing these harmful effects to the or harmful reproductive effects in these fishes. Just brief introduction to exercise. So as you probably know, exercise will generate a lot of free radicals, the same ones I showed you before, but a very important aspect here is the role of iron in exercise. So whenever you exercise, you always have hemolysis, so release of iron, of heme iron from hemoglobin, or rupture of muscle fibers. Then you will release myoglobin in heme iron in the circulation. And as you can see here, it doesn't matter if you are untrained or trained or a trained person. The pre-post exercise evaluation shows that iron content in plasma is always augmented. It's just a matter of how much, if you're trained or not. Okay, there are other mechanisms that could explain free radicals production or reactive oxygen species productions during exercise, which involves an enzyme called xanthine oxidase involving uric acid production. But we also cannot forget the production of heme iron. And then we checked that with the rats. So this experimental assay involves forced swimming. So we add 5% of body weight of the rats as weights in their tails, forcing them to swim, avoiding to sink, of course. And then we measured how much time they could survive before exhaustion. And this was amazing. By working only with astaxanthin, we could observe 25% more time before exhaustion. Only working with astaxanthin. We bet if we combine this with other antioxidants, we could observe higher effects, we presume. Not sure. And if we check some of the parameters in plasma, as you can see here, for example, iron, which I told you is very is a biomarker of oxidative stress related to exercise. As you can see here, after exercise, we had almost 3-fold increase of iron in plasma of these animals, but whenever they were fed with astaxanthin, the augmentation was much less. So this was important to check that astaxanthin supplementation delays physical exhaustion and prevents redox imbalances in plasma and soleus muscles of Windstar rats. So, concluding, astaxanthin, we worked several times with algal biomass rich in astaxanthin from green algae, improved performance and inhibited oxidative stress in soleus muscles of rats submitted to exhausting swimming tests. In vitro assays showed that the pretreatment with astaxanthin increased phagocytic activity of neutrophils, decreased oxidative burst of PMA-activated neutrophils, decreased outer-membrane oxidation of these neutrophils. Upon combined supplementation with omega-3 fatty acids, astaxanthin decreased anxiety and fear behavior in rats, as we tested with the elevated plus mazed, but we are not sure about krill oil efficiency. Finally, astaxanthin showed potential application for health benefits in most ordinary individuals or competitive athletes, but of course, much further studies are still necessary. My time is running out. I just would like to present some of our facilities there in our university. This is the sports complex we have there, which provides services for the communities around the university. This is the view from outside, the swimming pool. Every Tuesday and Thursday you could find me swimming here. Exactly in this, no, sorry, in this lane here, because nobody likes, because of this noise. The court, which has held some university championship games, very nice. and this is our institute. So corridor, reception, our biochemistry laboratories, cell culture laboratory, the flow cytometry equipment. This is the lab for human performance, athletic or physiological performance, and we also have animals created there. This is a metabolic chamber for rats. This is a treadmill for rats. Amazing! You can collect the CO2 and oxygen provided in the atmosphere here, and the rat keeps running there. Poor guy. And then this is the unfortunate fate for them. Sorry. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Si hay preguntas.
¿En inglés, Spanish?
Puede ser en español.
¿Hay alguna? Bueno, muchas gracias por la presentación.
Gracias.
¿Tenéis alguna hipótesis sobre cómo la astaxantina puede mejorar la función cognitiva? ¿Se sabe si puede acumularse en el cerebro? Porque estuve en una reunión en primavera y sí que se ha descrito que la luteína se puede acumular en el cerebro y además en determinadas regiones del cerebro, y que eso también mejora la función, se ha asociado a mejorar la función cognitiva. Entonces no sé si con la astaxantina hay algún modelo o
La verdad es que nuevamente es una cuestión de concentración, porque me parece que cuando la concentración es muy elevada, como observamos con el células inmunes, este efecto en la membrana es un rigidifying effect, torna la membrana rígida e impide o bloquea una serie de procesos importantes para la membrana. Es curioso porque con los ácidos grasos pasa lo contrario, hay un efecto fluidizante de la membrana. Entonces es increíble porque los resultados positivos que obtuvimos me parece que es en términos de propiedades físico-químicas, es una combinación del efecto rígido de astaxantina con el efecto fluidizante de omega 3, porque en exceso omega 3 fue perjudicial en el cerebro de ratos. Entonces es una manera de combinar dos efectos e incrementar la capacidad antioxidante de seguimiento del cerebro. Entonces me parece que es un producto de la combinación de su efecto antioxidante plus este efecto rígido en la membrana. Tiene que tener una concentración óptima para contemplar los dos efectos. Yes?
I'd like to ask you about the nitric oxide effect on cardiovascular disease and see what experience you have. And then, well, that's it.
Yeah, mostly because of the proper antioxidant properties of astaxanthin. When absorbed, it could be found in LDL, for example, and then it will retard the oxidation process that it triggers the atherosclerotic plaque formation in arteries. So this is the main event. I think, once again, regarding this rigidifying effect, there must be something related to that, you know, because, and again, the concentration effect, there must be a limit. I remember some researchers from Hawaii, they were working hard on astaxanthin cardiovascular properties, and I can't properly remember, but they have shown that there's an effect directly in the cardiomuscular tissue. Despite astaxanthin does not accumulate highly in this tissue. It's like if you supplement the rats with astaxanthin, most of it, the carotenoid, accumulates in the skin. It's clear if you see the tail of the rat tails. but it seems that the secondary distribution could be important in muscles, as we probably have here in these positive results in exercise, and also in cardio muscles, I think.
Now, at the brain level, the importance of this preventing senility and Alzheimer's disease?
Maybe, yes, maybe, but I presume as a chronic treatment, or let's say a whole life exposure to these significant concentrations of astaxanthin. So let's say the principle that says that eating fish twice a week is good for your mental health. Maybe salmon twice a week, providing fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids and astaxanthin. Yes?
Do you think it could be worked with vegetable omega-3s?
Good question. Yeah, probably, yes. With for example, linoleic acid from, what do you say? Yes. Depending on the bioavailability of these compounds, if you could absorb as much as we assume these compounds have measured by chemical tests.
Gracias.